Hey gang, this is Ciarán. Before the beginning of the episode, what you're about to hear is a wonderful interview that Uma and Nick did while I was very sick. Just want to say that heads up, we obviously know about the Berlin 4. We will be doing an episode on that soon on the main feed. For those who don't know, for residents of Berlin, one American, one Polish person, and two Irish people are being threatened with deportation without any crimes and for attending pro-Palestinian rallies. This is obviously, because two of them are Irish, this is big news in Ireland. For me, this is kind of like another entry into the long list of things that I didn't think the German state would, a norm that would be broken by the German state. I didn't think they would go after EU citizens, especially in this moment when, supposedly EU unity in response to Trump and Russia is so important right now. Anyway, we will just saying that, we do these episodes on a bit of a delay, and we have got in touch with Hanno to come on the episode. If you don't know Hanno Hauenstein, he former guest, and he's also he broke the reporting on this for The Intercept and Plus 972. Yeah, strongly recommend you give his article a read. If you're listening to this Monday morning, as soon as it comes out, it's worth knowing there is demos planned today in Berlin, in Amsterdam, in Dublin. I'd strongly recommend looking up the hashtag Berlin4 for more information on that. And yeah, Instagram, place to be. Also recommend our good friends over the Irish Bloc Berlin for keeping you abreast of all of that news. Just getting this out at the beginning of the episode because, like I said, we do these on a delay. And go out there and protest, to be honest. Talk to your local Palestinian solidarity group about this, especially if you are somewhere else within the European Union. I believe also templates for sending out to various government officials and MEPs and MPs and all that stuff have been provided in multiple languages. Yeah, because this is, it's bad. All right. And now over to the wonderful interview.
Hey, welcome to your weekly corner Späti. It is myself, Nick, and I am joined with Uma.
Hello.
And today we have a special guest, Awadalla, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is a writer, filmmaker, and you told me just to say general background in community work, which I really appreciated because that's a very broad spectrum of activism and community organizing. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, we've been emailing for like a month and a half or something like that. So I'm very happy and excited that it's finally happening and that we're seeing each other as well.
Yeah, I actually because podcasts are very audio, so I like the fact that we could see each other. It just makes it much more, personal in a way. Yeah.
For sure. Oh, it's also much more awkward if you can't see each other because you're like, oh, when do I talk? Like now? Okay.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the year, Uma went to the alternative to Berlinale, which was called Palinale.
Yeah.
And explain your experience there and why you wanted to bring Awadalla on to talk about the film.
Okay, Awadalla is laughing already. It was okay. I mean, the whole thing was great idea. Loved it. Boycott Berlinale. So there was the Palinale, which was like a parallel film festival for those of us who wanted to do the boycott of Berlinale. And one of the days, Awadalla's short film, Queer Exile, which is what we're going to be talking about today, was being shown. And I mean, obviously I love the film. That's why Awadalla is here. But the whole experience was a bit odd. And I think we can just talk about it later. I think it's more of like it's a bit like a funny thing, like haha, hee. I mean, it wasn't that funny, but it was just like interesting.
It's very
to
German,
see.
you mentioned to me.
Yeah, it was very German. There was a lot of like weird. I mean, before the Queer Exile was shown, there was this like Palestinian man literally living in occupied territories, just talking about their experience. And there was this like, white German in the audience just asking them like, oh, well, what can we do? And just being like very like white, like showcasing their white guilt. And it was just like, this man is literally being stopped by the IDF every day. Like, they don't need to tell you what to do. Like, it was a weird vibe in that sense. But whatever. We're not gonna keep talking about that. Queer Exile, which is Awadalla's film, I really, really loved. And I guess obviously it's like a very broad question, but for those of like the listeners that haven't seen it, watched it, what is Queer Exile? What is it about?
Yeah, it was a funny screening, so just validating that.
Thank you.
But that's how it goes. You meet the people and meet the audience, and every time something else comes up. Queer Exile is about me. But it's about my journey from Egypt to Germany, and how I had to leave Egypt in the wake of the 2011 revolution. After the revolution, usually comes a counter-revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to leave in that context and seek asylum in Germany. So it is about that journey, but every time I talk about myself, I'm talking about something bigger than myself. Mm-hmm. And especially that I am commenting on two really major events that happened in the last couple of decades, mm-hmm. which is the revolution or the Arab Spring, or, in general, like rebellion and resistance, and thinking about rebellion as like, for me, that is how I understand my queerness. Mm-hmm. It's that, that it's a way of life and an existence, whether you choose it or not, that is kind of like going against the mainstream, mm-hmm. going against the stream, literally. And kind of staying with that, kind of like, okay, actually, I don't fit, and I'm not gonna make something out of not fitting. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to try to make myself fit into the norms and what is expected of life, the expectations of mm-hmm. how life should be lived. And the other big thing that I'm also kind of engaging with and commenting on is the so-called refugee crisis. I arrived in 2014, so before the term mm-hmm. was coined, because that was mostly in 2015 when a larger group of people have started to move and cross borders towards Germany. And then we might remember those scenes of people marching en masse towards Germany in particular. And this like moment of debate of like, what should we do? And like, should we close the borders? Should we open them? I always think that, it was the refugees themselves that were crossing the borders. Nobody opened the borders. People were always crossing mm-hmm. The borders, no matter the risk was, no matter if they were open or closed. I mean, mm-hmm. border are also a social construct. And actually, it was that movement that created a lot of border policies to become much, much, much tighter and much, much more strict. And at the moment that this refugee welcome was declared, a lot of the refugee laws were being changed to make the asylum rights much more strict than before.
Yeah. So, I mean, as Nick said earlier, you are basically a writer, and I know you mentioned this in the Q&A, but not everybody was able to attend that Q&A. But why? I think I heard you say that it took you 3 years to do Queer Exile, right? And so why did you decide to move from writing to, filmmaking? And also, at what point in your life was that decision made, right?
I do remember, I was always like a very cinema buff kind of person, like as a child, like I was glued to the TV and I loved film. And I did have that kind of like fantasy. I'm like, oh, I'm going to make films one day. But I was like, that's just like children fantasies. And, and I think I was always kind of like also like a very textual person. Like I loved, my attention, even as a child. I remember like if I walked down the street, I would just read every sign on the street. So and then I realized that not everybody is like that. Some people like just like see a sign and they maybe see its color, but they don't really read what's on that sign. So I think I was always like attracted to the words, and somehow from writing a diary to then writing articles and essays and blogs, and so that kind of continued. Why I decided to make films, I don't know. I think it was something it's maybe like I was realizing that childhood dream, but also maybe because we live in the age of TikTok.
Yeah.
And realizing that, like, to communicate, I like to tell stories in different forms and mediums, and I just wanted to expand and learn like other language of communicating.
I really enjoyed the film. I think the message came across obviously really well. And I saw that it's also been shown in many international film festivals. So I assume the international reception has been quite good, but I think since we're corner Späti and we talk about Germany mostly.
Well, we talk about Europe.
We do talk about Europe, but still, most of us still live in Germany. And I saw, obviously, besides Palinale, I saw that it's been shown in other, like, more queer film festivals in Germany, like the München one, right? And I am interested to know, maybe you didn't see any quote unquote reaction or whatever, but I'm really interested to know what kind of reaction did like the German audience have to Queer Exile. Have you come across like, I don't know, reviews or someone has gone up to you and you're like, oh wow, okay, that is, I don't know. I'm curious to know if there's something that has stood out to you from the German perspective of Queer Exile.
The film premiered in 2024 in Berlin at the Exposed Queer Film Festival. And I was happy. That was a festival that I really like and that I really respect and appreciate. So that was kind of like a really full circle moment for me. And since then, it did have a life and it did travel, like really, Queer Exile is my debut film. So, and I did it with like almost no budget. So for it to travel wide and to have that resonance, it's really it feels really moving, and I'm happy about that life that it has. And it's also been screened in academic spaces, in classrooms, in art spaces. So it's not just like the film festival circuit. So it did have, I have been to a screening in the premiere, in Berlin, and I'm not always present in a lot of screenings. I have been to a screening in Lisbon earlier this year, which was a beautiful event, like very heavily attended. There was like a lot of people who couldn't get into the room because
Nice.
I think it was also like a short films from the Middle East, or the more political correct term, Swana. And I think Lisbon doesn't have a big community of people from the region, and that's why there was a lot of like hunger towards like hearing stories from that part of the world. So to be honest, if I am present in the space, usually in Berlin, in the screening in Berlin, there has been screening in Munich, and another one is happening next month. People usually come to me and say they have been moved. They say to me, even though again it's a very personal story, I go into my childhood, my life journey and my path, but people tell me that they relate to it, and I find that powerful because, of course, maybe I was thinking about people who are kind of like more similar to me, or like had similar life circumstances, would kind of relate to it. But I realized I would meet a straight white person, and they say that they feel seen by it. So that's been really beautiful for me. And I do think, when I was thinking about exile, I do think that is a general condition of life. I wanted to talk about exile as a condition, and I wanted to connect different narratives of exile together, so it does have a very specific meaning of being forced to leave your country and not being able to return. And people maybe talk about like chosen exile, or, in the case of like refugees, you're literally being punished. And that's a very ancient punishment that existed in society, that you get banished from your society because you don't fit in, or you upset the king, or, you're starting a new religion, or, so all of these things get people exiled and banished from their communities. And because they know that it is very painful condition, and it is a maddening condition. So that's why it has persisted also through the years and until now. So in the film, you see like there are some moments in the visual and like in what you hear in the film that try to kind of speak to these different experiences of exile. Some of it is about there's not a lot of narrative of Egyptian diaspora in general. Because there is, of course, Egyptian diaspora, but there's not, it doesn't, it's not for example, like the Iranian diaspora. We hear a lot about like the Iranian diaspora, and they have like a strong voice and kind of like representation and activism as well. So you can see, for example, like in the 80s in Egypt, there was a mass exodus. It was mostly during like, this economic and social political change towards westernization, and the country was undergoing the structural adjustment process. So that meant, a lot of people were becoming poor, and a lot of people were moving to Gulf countries. That included my family. My family did move for a short period to Saudi Arabia. That is a story of a lot of Egyptian families. And that kind of separation, you can see it in a song. One of the songs that is in the film is a song that captures that mood. It's about a woman who's waiting for her lover, or, husband, or maybe it's also her brother or father, who has traveled and she's missing him. And that is like one narrative of exile. A lot of people have to leave their countries for so many different reasons. And we all relate to that experience. We are all kind of exiled in one way or another. And also you could see Palestine in the film. You could see it once and you could hear it once, because in one of the Stolpersteine, like there is a scene in the film with the stepping stones, which commemorate the expulsion of the Jewish people from Berlin. So you can see that one of them says that the people were banished or exiled to Palestine. And because usually it says where people were sent to.
Yeah. But that surprises me. I would think that Germany, even if like obviously the historical term at that time as well was Palestine, that really surprises me that they would put in a Stolpersteine Palestine. I remember seeing it in the film and being like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So exactly. It was like a very conscious choice to choose this specific one.
For sure, yeah.
Because it does have like that, it has a lot of meanings, and it is like about this continuity of exile. It's something you can see it, and you see like it's in the 40s, but it is something that continues in several ways. So yeah, I did want these kind of different narratives of exile to speak to each other.
Yeah, for sure. Also, a really interesting thing that you said in the Q&A was that journalists usually, well, firstly, really cool that Queer Exile is like the first-hand account like this without media interference or like without being helped by helped or quote unquote by by other journalists but I thought it was really interesting when you said that journalists always want to know about your experience, or journalists or the media or like people in general just want to know about your experience in Egypt, but they never ask about your experience in Germany, which is literally what stood out the most to me when I was watching Queer Exile, because you were saying that you lived in this asylum seeker camp and there were Nazi marches like almost every day outside, quote unquote, protesting the the camp and the people in it. And then also the comment, which was insane, by the civil servant that gave you your German passport, who said something like, you're a German citizen now, but if you go back, it's not on us, or like, we can't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of like, if you go back, we're washing
You're
our
not
hands.
responsible for what happens to you.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, how can people, I don't know, watch that and not be like, we need to know about what they went through in Germany, not in Egypt. Like, this is just, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like it as much as Queer Exile has been trying to tell my story, but it also comes from a lot of anger about that kind of situation, like that kind of like speaking over, that kind of like condescension, that kind of like appropriation of our not only our stories, our existence. Like, we exist here in the country, and like my existence is used to justify the image of Germany as a liberal and democratic and functional state. So you are here, you're a refugee, we welcomed you and we give you space to be here. So we're good. And that's, it's kind of a rebranding, kind of like a rebranding strategy to what Germany, what it has usually, like historically stood for. In like looking at the 20th century history.
Just history.
So yeah, it's like to just have your body like being used as like a discursive tool, and to justify then like like at the same time I was I in that very first camp that I was living in it was I lived in Lichtenberg, and then I lived in Marzahn, and I would just tell people, like, I didn't really know anything about Berlin because I just came here to speak at a conference and I broke the visa. So, so nobody kind of like, you have to kind of like take that risk to make it, even if like, my journey was nothing like people who literally crossed like seas and forests to come here. So I was always telling people where I live, and then we would say like, "What, you live there?" There's like, especially in Lichtenberg. Then they were like, "There's a lot of like Nazi like corners in that neighborhood." And then I had to see it myself when I moved to Marzahn, because there was literally demonstrations against the existence of the camp by neo-Nazi groups. And that was terrifying. I came here to like be safe or safer from what was going on for me in Egypt. And I was like, what year is this? Is this the 30s? Why are there Nazis still in this country? It was so like a very confusing experience. And at the same time, my flatmate or my roommate, because you don't live, you don't have a private space in a refugee camp. So he was a man from Afghanistan, and his asylum was rejected, and he was just expecting deportation at any day. So that kind of idea of refugees welcome, not only like about my own experience and how I felt like not safe, but like I was like, you're literally just dividing this refugees based on like who deserves and who's not, based on nationality, based on sexuality, based on race, based on religion. So and basically my existence is being used to also kind of like portray this image of like, you're a queer refugee, you're good, but like the others are bad, and to justify deportation. So like just to have your existence like to being leveled against other people is just a horrifying experience.
Yeah, I wanted to actually ask about specifically that of I guess the kind of twofold thing of like, one, that there is the bit that Uma talked about where it is the European mind can only like conceive of bad elsewhere. So therefore all the questions that then probably come your way of like, oh yeah, how was life in Egypt, or how was life here? How was life, wherever it is for then people who are refugees, people, no matter how good-hearted they seem to like be in their like, beliefs or actions or whatever, there is this like hyper orientalism that then of course like affects their thought. And I know from like a lot of friends of mine who are like from other parts of the world, most of the time they don't leave because they particularly like hate the place that they're from. Their families are there, their friends are there, there's plenty of good aspects of their lives that they are leaving behind. It is of course like a very like traumatic and difficult decision to make, that you no longer feel wanted or accepted or safe in the place that you're in. But and how Germany really does still also create this dynamic of, well, you're safe if you're the good migrant, the model citizen that then actually doesn't really exist because it's just a framework of their imagination. And so, like, how is then, how is your experience then, I guess, in Germany or in Berlin specific, of being queer in a city or a city more or less, not so much a country, that then apparently has this massive queer identity? How has this actually then come forth for you in your exile, I guess, in the name of the movie, like, is like I feel that then, at least from myself moving here, not being exile, but just like having these perceptions of Berlin when I came here, and the reality is actually significantly different in its kind of openness that it, I think, pretends sometimes to have, that it's a bit like for at least me as a white guy, I still find that then it's a little bit like jarring sometimes of that then the expectation of Berlin, I feel, never really meets the reality. And so how has that then been for you coming here then as someone who has been in a refugee camp, someone who is queer, and then apparently this is supposed to be the most like progressive city in the country?
Yeah. I feel like I went on a tangent to the previous question, but that might happen.
No. Like, fine. I think it was very good because my exactly what I was thinking of is that then these are perfect. These are the things that then I think of all the time of when people I know who've come here and they're like, I hate it here, and it's like, I get you, kind of, they're like, my life, like I wish that then like the place I can't go back to right now has the things that I have, my memories, my friends, my this, my that. This is just where I ended up, And Berlin pretends, I think, a lot of this time to be such an open and accepting place. But I feel for like most people that then, particularly non-white people who I meet who fit into, multiple categories, have like kind of similar experiences when they're like, yeah, like I'm here, but there's always like a lot of other kind of caveats to it. They're like, well, Berlin's not as accepting as people think it is, or Berlin's like this or that, and I can't really disagree with them.
Yeah. I mean, Queer Exile started as a hate letter to Berlin.
Hell yeah, we love that here.
And it moved into something else, but I feel like emotions change, they always change, everything changes, and I still did want to capture a certain feeling and a certain kind of like mood and certain experience, because I do have different experiences with Berlin as well. So it did start there. And I think to have that feeling when you arrive to a city that has a big propaganda of like being the queer haven was just a very alienating experience and a very isolating and lonely experience. Because you're here, and how do you feel about it? And that's literally like the first line in Queer Exile. I say, when people ask me how I feel about Berlin, I worry that if I say how I really feel, they will tell me to go somewhere else or to go back to where I come from, because they don't know where I come from or why I had to leave in the first place. So it was very jarring and bizarre to kind of like, is this freedom? I mean, I think as a, since I was young, like there's this like search for freedom and very like sharp consciousness of like this kind of constraints of like small town, I want to go to the big city, I will go to Cairo, and the revolution, and not like this like big moments of kind of like trying to look for liberation and try to actually actively seek it and to try to live it as well, not just as a concept, but like to live it out, and how that looks like, and like the price that you have to pay if you really try to seek a free life. So it was really difficult, because I think also like Berlin is like a lot about like, you come here and you discover yourself, and you have space for like creativity and art and sexual exploration and all of these things that the city usually stands for, and it's like an international image. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of like realize, okay, but that's really reserved to like a certain kind of like body and a certain kind of like experience. And as an asylum seeker, as a refugee, of course, like I spent a year like not knowing if I would be able to stay or not. So you cannot even like think about anything. You cannot plan anything. I quickly fell into this care work and like community work, because that's also my background. And it's something that I really love and I appreciate. I love to work with people, but I also it was also me trying to stabilize myself, and this idea of being precarious. I couldn't afford to be precarious. I had to have a job. I had to have like a contract. It's not so, but that also came with consequences, because like care work is also like very difficult work, and if you're already like kind of like a marginalized person doing that, then people like get burned out. People like really struggle. So I could see it, like I was working with a lot of people who, again, couldn't speak English like me, like, people who were not just, I mean, people think I'm a big extrovert because I can manage social situations, but I just had to learn it, like when you move to a new city and you need to kind of like rebuild your life, you just have to like open yourself up.
Yeah.
As someone who hosts a podcast who is very to themselves, I know exactly how that feels.
So yeah, like that experience of queerness is like, this like idea of like people like would assume like, oh, you must be enjoying like sexual freedom in Berlin. I'm like, girl, like I lived in Cairo. I didn't have to wait until to come to Berlin so I can like be sexually free. Yeah, like and like that kind of like limited also idea of like what freedom is. It's like, like,
Yeah,
you're going to the
course.
club and like you think you can like live freedom in a club. Like that's like, that's an institution like that you pay for to get in and like
You're
wait in
literally
line
paying,
and
like,
maybe you like get rejected. Like, is this
Yeah.
freedom for you?
Yeah, no, I think that's that's always for, like, don't get me wrong, like the clubs are clubs, and I think that people like realistically just need to look at them as that. And I've always jokingly on the show picked a bone with the sense of like people are too obsessive with this being like, oh, techno and the club scene is such a revolutionary act. It's like, first off, it's all stolen. The Germans didn't like invent this music as much as they want to pretend that it is. Getting together in places the Germans did not invent either. They just happened to be at like the right place at the right time with like a collapsed country that the club scene could then exist. And it was always had this like very like mixed political bag. It isn't like, yes, just because these like spaces exist. And I think we've seen this as well too since the genocide in Gaza, with how the club scene has been very like split on this, of like that there is a very political element that they're like, oh, we're political, but we won't touch this, or we will touch it, and we're very like pro-Zionist. And Berlin really has kind of always like had this, regardless of what identity it is always been this sense of fitting into like this this very like white Eurocentric narrative of it, to exactly the comment that you made of like, yeah, I had sexual liberation where I was from, I had my own sexual exploration. I don't need to come to Berlin to find out that I'm queer, like these are stuffs that then of our identities that then, yes, sure, fine, moving somewhere doesn't need to be this place, can maybe awaken something in you or whatever, but it doesn't need to be, this like kind of bullshit. I liked your use of propaganda specifically in terms of like queerness to the city, but yeah, this kind of falsified idea of what the city can then kind of provide people. And it is for specific people. It is a playground for people. Don't realize that Berlin's a playground if you have a lot more money. Yeah, you may dress poor, but like I see a lot of, yuppies going around, going to the club and this and that and that. Clubs are getting more expensive. And, these spaces are really kind of, excluding a lot of people, not even just to mention the financial aspect. Go to a club and see if you'll get in as a non-white person, like they don't want to admit that. But
yeah, I mean, like I remember like going to the club early in Berlin. I was like, I always had to prove my queerness.
Yeah,
because I was read as like a brown man, so or specifically an Arab man. So like there was like this kind of pressure of like, or like, are you queer? Do you know what this is? And
Yeah.
and I was like,
And it's also fine if you don't, this is the thing that then has always boggled my mind with this, is that then the queer gatekeeping is one of the things that I find, especially here, is very difficult to deal with sometimes. And I can imagine then from someone, not even just from like not from Berlin, but even like, imagine like, speaking of then if you're like a, country bumpkin in Germany, you have no interaction with queer culture that probably where you are in some Dorf, like in wherever it may be. And then you come to Berlin and this is all just like, it can be exhausting for anyone, not even just for refugees or wherever it may be. There is like a very performative aspect of Berlin, I feel, that then's always very difficult to kind of like get around, and makes it a bit at least like suffocating, I would say, at least from my experiences of it.
I mean, I also like do remember like, this how we like queer refugee became something that is instrumentalized. I remember one of the clubs, I'm not going to mention the name, was like hosting this kind of like, queer refugee solidarity party. And I just posted a comment. I was like, do you have like, tickets for refugees or like free tickets or something so that like people actually get into the space?
Yeah.
And they were like, we haven't thought about that, but we'll think about it and we'll get back to you. And I was like, how come that's not the first thing that you thought about?
It's performative. It's just performative.
Yeah.
It's part of this propaganda, as you were saying.
And then you can also see like how this, like, I remember when I was very new here, I tried to organize a panel on racism in the queer community, because that's also like the reality of like, this like queer bubble. And moving within it as a person of color or like, as a racialized person, and like the fetishization, like the, exoticization of like, queer brown bodies, and then kind of like, trying to address it and create space around it. And of course, like I'm not the first person who like, addresses this. Is have always been like, queers of color in Germany, and there's like other generations. But I felt like still like there was like, how is this like kind of missing? Like, and I remember like it was a very difficult experience to just organize this panel, because, there was a lot of pushback, even like at the time, like just to like say the word white was like people would get so defensive. And I'm talking about 2015. 2016. Yeah. So I'm saying this because I think what people like also don't realize, like how this movement of people have shifted this country, and have opened up, thinking, because we get blamed that we have caused the rise of the right wing. As if like it's not something that has been very like homegrown.
Yeah, the Germans easily could have done it themselves. They've been fine at being
at doing it themselves. Yeah.
Exactly.
They don't need any help doing it.
Like exported anti-Semitism, exported homophobia and transphobia, and I'm like, but we actually shifted the course and we opened up, the country, and we caused literally with our bodies encounters that were not possible before. So things that were very like offensive and obscene then, like, now they're part of conversations and but I still think we're kept at our place, and this is the experience again of being like, from my part of the world and moving in this like spaces, even the structures that are made to support others and care structures. It was like I always felt like that I'm kept at a certain like, there's this glass ceiling. So you cannot take like leadership positions. You cannot get to like, shape and make the city. Of course, it has changed dramatically because there are like, spaces now by queer people of color. But it has taken a long time to get there. And still, even if we get that, we're still like in the corner,
Yeah. And I think too it's also shown very well in the sense of that there is this absolute dismissal, it feels like, from general German, like Germanness, if you will. That you'll always hear these stories of like, oh, well, not even just, but the fear of going to, oh, what about like, the German Berlin, like the city and state always makes a big hubbub about like Sonnenallee and Neukölln, and they're like, what about all like the Jews and queers that need to be protected? It's like, have you been to like Neukölln? Do you like have you seen what this place is? It's not this like, there is this idea that it's some like, like micro caliphate because well off white journalists in Germany have no idea what they're talking about in this aspect, and can just kind of pick this boogeyman of spaces of non-Germans, and this has always been the thing historically, whether it be you have like an Arab neighborhood, say in like Neukölln, or historically in the past of Kreuzberg being like quite Turkish. Germany has always been very, or before that with the otherings that then Germany has done, there is always this like continuous push, it feels like, from like the greater German narrative to then always other that. How would then, I guess, like you mentioned the sense that it's like you've had to kind of make the space for yourself. How is then that like kind of doubled down on the sense of not only being that you have to make a space then as, or like, making space as a queer person in Berlin of like, hey, yeah, there's other aspects to this than just being, your cookie cutter, doused in stereotype stuff, but then also within the sense of the hyper racialized aspect of that, then one being queer and being Arab means that, oh, you obviously, like you have to have had nothing but constant, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like constant oppression and stuff like that, that only that could come from somewhere elsewhere. But as you've mentioned, quite well, I think in our conversation here, is that there's been different forms of that, whether it be exclusion or whether it be tokenism, that Germany has kind of done with you in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this today because, as I said, I was experiencing a revolution in Egypt. I did grow up in dictatorship. And how that, like, I was talking about, like, my personal experience and my kind of my observation, my analysis is like how this is dangerous, like these media conversations. Like, I remember, like, arriving here and like, just you turn the radio on and you hear like refugees every literally like 30 seconds, and I'm like, this is propaganda. this is like,
100%.
You're restructuring brains by just like having this constant kind of influx of images and news. It does something to people, and that was clear to me because, like, again, like we grew up with authoritarianism, so we can recognize it. And the frustrating thing is, like, that we were just not getting heard, and like that kind of like analysis, this kind of like vision was just seen as paranoid and like, dramatic, and you're too subjective, and that's like, again, the crisis. I think I talk a lot about, like, knowledge production and who gets to like produce knowledge, who gets to like produce ideas, who gets to be seen as an expert, whether it's like related to like, my community work and like mental health and like sexual health, or like, just all this conversation about migration and like who gets to be heard, who gets to like decide what truth is. And again, like now we're talking about like, genocide, and we're having like a war on truth, and it comes down to like who gets to be believed and who gets to be heard and who gets to construct truth. So people like me, like, don't, like, as a queer person, or like, and it's not just about identity, it's also like about your political orientation. I think, like, for me, like, it's not about sexual orientation, it's about political orientation. And like, you could have like, people who fit all this like, checks of like identity, but like, what is your position? What are you trying to say? And again, like, you would come across all of these like barriers and boundaries if you don't fit what people like to hear, or what challenges like, the status quo.
Yeah, there seems to be like a constant like only having to play like the victim role, it seems like, here, at least like from the understanding that I'm getting. And that then, as you mentioned, it's like, yeah, like you're from a country where then you can like recognize where, these behaviors you've seen before, and you grew up in, I mean, Egypt for all of my lifetime has been either a dictatorship or a collapsed government that turned into a different dictatorship. And like, Europeans, and I mean, not just European, Westerners just kind of are either, I would say, now into like two camps of that. Either that then this could never happen here, like we are the dominant race, which is just, different versions of white nationalism. Or then you're having, I would say, like the other reaction, which is the sense of like everyone finally realizing that the behaviors that are becoming so normalized of the ultra right, whether it be in Germany or Italy or the United States with Trump, that then there's now this panic to the point where they can't even actually function. That there's this inability, I feel, then of like the common European to actually like have a reaction in the sense of fascism, because they don't know living outside of that comfort zone. Everything has always kind of like existed as, as at least for Germany since reunification, it's just kind of like been there. There's been like crises, whatever, but the ability then too for Germany just to then like and like, as you mentioned earlier, just of the sense of throwing the propaganda towards refugees and this and that is very I don't know, just generally like worrisome. And it does like I really appreciate hearing then your thing of that, then it's not only just like the identity then of you can, yeah, like you said, you can check all the boxes. You can also have check all the boxes and have horrible politics. You could also be completely against your own interests, or buy into all the bullshit, or buy into then like the either fake or overblown, I mean, Germany right now won't stop talking about migrants, and I got to be honest, I don't know who they're talking about. It's just a blanket term just to be fearful.
Yeah.
And
you'll always be a migrant even if it's like your grandparents who migrated.
Yeah. Oh, especially in this country, 100%. Germans have a very hard time of like, I mean, you said that then in the sense of when you got your German passport and they just straight up told you of like, well, you're on your own now. And it's like, well, like legally I'm not, but like, this is, I don't like, at least if I was in your situation, I would feel quite startled hearing that from a Beamte of just like, yeah, you get this document, but don't pretend that it actually means the same for you as it would in the sense of if like I were to get German citizenship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're seeing now lately, like the recent news of like, again, like deportations for people who were, involved in the pro-Palestine movement and in the demonstrations. And I mean, I happened to watch the Abendschau. And a lot of people find that crazy, but I mean,
I was about to say, like,
it's a great exercise and kind of like feeding propaganda.
Yeah,
and it's just like, yeah, it's fascinating how like the narrative is like twisted, but again, like it's happening now to a group of people that were not affected before, and that has been happening before. I mean, as I said, like from the first day I was living with a person who was being deported. So certain bodies didn't fit. Certain people were not seen as worthy. And I personally cannot see, like, I cannot differentiate, like, is it like, because of like political opinion, or is it because of like, religion or race, or it's deportation. It's a very violent system. It's very cruel. It kills people, and and I it's of course it's important that we speak about that and and try to stop it at any cost. But it's important for me to say, like, this has always been going on, and it just was less visible. And I always could see that, from like that marginal perspective, like the more marginalized and like being in this asylum, like in between state of like not being a citizen of any place, you kind of like the more on the margin, you can see more of that. But again, like it somehow becomes a way to dismiss what you're saying, because you don't know enough, and you're not neutral about the topics that you're talking about. So again, like these tactics of like gaslighting and like silencing, and we just like need to be able to recognize these dynamics, because all of us can like fall into it. So, and again, like for me, it's really not about identity, but it's like, how do you like build the tools to actually like read the text, read like the reality, and see, of course, it is always relational. It is always about your position. But also what are we not seeing, even when we're like looking closely.
Yeah. And I think too, that's a good point to kind of reflect on as well, with the sense of like Germany, or I guess any country for that sense, can create an other out of anything, like you mentioned the sense of your bunkmate from Afghanistan, and Germany, remember years ago, was like, oh, it's a safe country of return, while then like the country is either in complete chaos or controlled by the Taliban. Germany was like, well, fine, like, the U.S. isn't there anymore. We took our troops out. It should be fine now. And, immediately with the capitulation of Assad, Germany immediately, their first reaction was, well, how do we then declare Syria to be a safe place to send people back, There's always been that aspect of course, like the countries of origin, this and that. Germany doesn't want these people. This has always been kind of on the forefront. That even like your like general lib in Germany, your typical Green voter who probably does vote for a party that then promotes horrible migratory policies, they themselves are probably actually against. But that's a whole other different thing. But the inability of, I think, then the like, especially with then the most recent possible deportations of these 4 European citizens because of their political actions, shows exactly that, of that the otherness doesn't need to simply just be then an identity. It can be then something other than what you affiliate yourself with. And that really is something I think that's like, breaking a few people's brains right now, of like, well, wait, how does this country have these like liberal democratic values, but then yet if you don't conform, I mean, the idea that in Germany you have to then, not even just like the state of Israel, but you have to like openly support it in order for you to be seen as a possible candidate for citizenship is absurd. It's also illegal, but that doesn't matter. Legality is simply then that of
othering as well.
Yeah, of course, and I think that it's very telling of that, these perspectives are always, or these kind of mechanisms of othering are always constantly changing, and who then is falling into these groups. I don't want to be pessimistic with the sense of it, but it is just realistically so, of that then like these are ever changing. And simply by, I'm not saying that we're brave or whatever, but it's just like simply by doing this podcast and having the political opinion we do seems a bit frightening for us, or like simply talking with the people that we do. I don't think that any of the members of the show are going to be deported, but it does create a sense of fear, which is of course what the state wants to do as well.
Yeah. I mean, I always think, this is the thing, like, it does come down to, a lot of this comes down to fear, and a lot of this comes down to like, breaking solidarity between people, and, constructing enemies, and constructing, animosities and tensions between people who otherwise could, be in the same shoes, and we often fall for that. I do have like my own strand of like, I'm very like, I very much believe in like pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. It's not that I'm like, I see like that the future is brighter. But I do tend to be a little bit utopic in the sense of like, I do want to create the life that I want to see. And that's a very important distinction, that again of like, who gets seen as an expert, because, we tend to kind of like promote like people who kind of like have like the right terms and like, theory. And again, like for me, like it's really people who have like life experience, and they're making art or writing or like work that is coming from lived experience. It can be much, much harder. That's why it took 3 years to finish a short film, because when you make something about your personal life, the risks are higher. There's so much more, this visibility is a risk. And that's, and at the same time, you can be dismissed, because you're like talking theory that is coming from actual life. Like none of these things is abstract. Deportation is not abstract for me. Borders are not abstract. So it's really about like, how do we kind of like actually amplify and listen to like, the people who are talking about experience, but also not, and embracing risk. I really don't believe in like, I think ideas of security and safety are actually usually very dangerous ideas. And they usually like to promote like this kind of like, like a family or like, whiteness or all of these things, that for me, is like, no, there's no safety. Nothing is safe, and just embrace it. Like it always has to be a risk. And that's actually where change happens.
Well, I think that that's a very good place to end our conversation, if you ask me. I think that that's, it is pessimistic, you're right. But I don't think pessimistic. I think just realistic of the sense of, actually truly like trying to analyze and understand these things. But yeah, like it change never does come from the sense of just like sitting around and doing nothing, or it takes risk, like you said. And I think that that's a very good message to kind of end on, unless anyone had anything else to add.
I was just like listening to you both. So like, that was such a great conversation. I'm really happy that we could have you on, Awadalla. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation as well. And looking forward to see how the audience reacts, hopefully in a different way from Palinara.
I have no idea what our listenership is actually like, so let's hope for the best.
It's just to like finish it, because it was quite strange, because Awadalla's film was shown before another film, which was also very interesting, and it's with other topics touched. And then the people at the Q&A were asking questions or like making comments about the second film, when the director wasn't there, when Awadalla was just standing there. And I don't think like you handled it so well. You were just like chilling, but I was dying of secondhand embarrassment. I was just like sitting in the audience like, why are these people? Oh my God. Anyway.
Yeah.
I can assure you.
Some people were like too stunned to speak, so
exactly. I think definitely our audience are not gonna. Well, now just to piss us off, they're gonna start asking questions about something random. Yeah. No, but is there anything that you want to shout out, or where can people find you, find your work?
I mean, you could follow me on Instagram. I have another film in the making.
Fun.
I have
Nice.
a blog that also I post similarly regularly on. So yeah, it would be nice to, of course, exchange and connect with people on different platforms.
Cool. We're gonna put those links on the episode description for sure, I think.
Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation. And check out Queer Exile, I guess, wherever it may be. I don't know, like, where is there a way that then viewers can watch it, like, or is it simply just going to be shown at
Yeah, it's going around, and I said next screening is in Munich actually, but there will be other screenings in Berlin soon. So yeah.
Then if it's in your area, check it out. And thank you so much for coming on. And on that note, we will see everyone on the bonus, I believe. I don't know which one this is. It's fine.
Yeah.
But take care.
Bye-bye.
Tschüss.